Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll just be beginning the webinar in a couple of minutes. We're waiting for a few more attendees to join. So stay tuned. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on coping with the pressure to do well. Thank you for making time on this beautiful Sunday morning, and I hope that you and your families are safe and well. My name is Miraya Gupta, and I'm a psychology student in grade 12. The pressure to do well is extremely overwhelming. And for me, it feels like there's always new things coming at me about which I have to worry. Whether it's people around me acting like the ICSE 10th board was the be all and end all of my life, or an important dance performance in front of a large audience, or playing a match which is being recorded and live streamed, the pressure to do well can often feel inescapable. Many times we're told, beta, just do your best. But how exactly can we do our best when we're under so much pressure? And this is why I feel that all of us would benefit from having a conversation around this topic and learning a few strategies to cope with pressure. Our speaker today is counseling psychologist Tulika Lal, who founded All Heart India as a center for social and emotional well-being in Delhi. Her work involves therapy and counseling for children, young adults, and parents to promote positive mental health. She was a part of the team that designed the Delhi state government's mental health curriculum called the Happiness Curriculum, the first of its kind in India. And I'm happy to say that this is the third webinar in the series that we're doing together. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Miraya, for organizing this and for sharing what you did. It reminded me of my days as a student and squash player. So, today's topic addresses a very common phenomenon almost all of us have experienced. We live in very competitive times with some very smart people, and as a result, there always seems to be this incredible need to excel. And so we constantly feel under pressure. And for many of us, this pressure means to live in a state of stress and fear. Having said that, there are also some people who find pressure situations extremely exciting. So it all bottles down to how we look at a particular situation and our attitude towards it. So the intent for this webinar is for everybody to be able to use pressure as a tool to better themselves and ultimately have a healthy relationship with it. In short, to survive and thrive.
So, before we begin, I'd like to share a video with everybody, which I found really relatable, and it shows a girl who's under a lot of pressure.
Okay, everybody, cake
Thank God
time!
I really have to study. Oh, sweetheart, can't you just take a minute to enjoy it? It's your birthday. You put too much pressure on yourself.
I remember my Sweet 16. I wanted a theme party. Moonstruck had just come out, but I hadn't. So
No
I was...
stories, no time, SATs.
Here we go, everybody.
Hey, we all know why we're here.
Hi, honey, you missed one.
I know I missed one. I'm not an idiot.
Whoa.
There, happy?
Whoa, you're being a little...
Obstreperous? Recalcitrant? Truculent?
I was gonna say cray-cray.
Alex, sweetie.
I really need to focus. There is a 16-year-old science prodigy studying cancer research at Johns Hopkins. 16! What am I doing? I'm eating cake!
No.
No.
So I found the pressure that this girl was under totally relatable. Even though I may not necessarily smash a cake into my face, I can get where she's coming from. And before we get into our content, just a brief structure of the webinar today. So our content is divided into two parts, surviving under pressure and thriving under pressure. This is going to be an hour long, 45 minutes discussion and 15 minutes for Q&A. If you have questions during the course of the webinar, please put them into the Q&A box you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And we will be conducting a few polls, all of which are anonymous, and you just need to click or tap on the answer you choose to submit them. And as mentioned, under surviving under pressure, we'll understand the need to do well, understand how can we deal with competition and expectations, and get to know the distinction between pressure and stress. Under thriving under pressure, we'll understand whether pressure is always negative, whether practice really does make perfect, and develop a healthy relationship with pressure by understanding how to cope with it in the moment, the interim, and the long term. And of course, strategies to cope with pressure will be given throughout. And now coming to our first section, surviving under pressure. What was your take on the girl's reaction in this video?
So what we saw in the video was an example of this girl who felt tremendous amounts of pressure over wanting to do well in her exam, which she considered important, of course, which eventually led to a meltdown during her birthday celebrations. So whether you're speaking in front of hundreds of people or interviewing for your dream job, whether you're playing a championship game or even running an important project, you are a person under some pressure. Comparatively, even simpler tasks such as getting to a meeting on time, sending an email to a superior, or also has a level of associated pressure. So, stepwise, this is what usually happens. Step one, there is a situation or event in which one wants to do well. So, the pressure builds. Step two, this pressure to perform causes stress. Step three, when stress persists, it leads to anxiety, in this case, also known as performance anxiety. Step four, this anxiety, when experienced in a greater degree, can then lead to a breakdown, thus hampering performance. Before we go ahead, I just want to say that experiencing pressure is very natural. We all experience it. And with certain tools and techniques, which we will discuss below, we can definitely cope with it and use it to work for us.
So quite excited to learn more about how to cope with pressure. And at this point, we'd like to hear from the audience. So we have a poll for you. So the question is, what makes you feel the need to do well? And this is multiple choice, so you can pick as many answers as apply to you. Is it your own expectations of yourself? Is it your family's expectations, a parent, a child, even a distant relative, or your superior's expectations, maybe a teacher, a boss, or a supervisor? And for those of you joining us on YouTube, you might not be able to vote, but definitely put your answer into the comments. I can see that a lot of people have already voted, so just waiting for everybody else. Okay, and here are the results for this poll. So it seems like it's a combination of these three factors that makes us feel the need to do well. And when I dived into this topic and I tried to understand the reasons behind our need to do well, I found that the reason lies in the theory of evolution and survival of the fittest. Humans, just like any other animals, had to compete with one another in order to ensure their survival. So, for example, if you weren't the fastest runner, you would be eaten by a predator. And this mindset persists even in modern situations, which aren't necessarily life threatening, but can tend to feel that way. And this is why we feel the need to do well. It's evolutionarily embedded in us because it is the need to survive.
So, adding to what you said, this intrinsic need is the reason we have a tendency to compare ourselves with the better sports person, the better artist, the better student, etc., and be at par or ahead of them. It is also the reason why sometimes, scrolling through Instagram and seeing pictures of others' lives can facilitate a feeling of inadequacy or not doing enough. A good example will be when the lockdown happened. There was this pressure everybody felt to make this time productive. So, while there is nothing wrong with wanting to make use of time productively, the question to ask is, what is it that I really want to do with this time? Maybe some people wanted to do nothing at all. Sometimes it may not even be a particular event you have to prepare for. It could just be a general feeling of not being where you want to be in life. So, if I were to draw from the video we saw of the girl preparing for her exam, uh, she compared herself with the 16-year-old prodigy at Johns Hopkins, right? So, probably she wanted to get there before he did, perhaps, right? So, it then bottles down to what my priority and goals are. And probably the reason why 93% of us said that, this feeling of doing well comes from our own expectations of ourselves, right? So what I'd like to suggest is this activity for which we'll send you a template with a handout. So write down where I am in life currently and where do I want to be in the future. This will remind you that the competition is always with our own selves, and then we'll strive to reach this overlap between between our current and future selves, and in turn will encourage you to reach your best potential, since that is the only thing in our hands. We can't possibly stop another person from doing well.
So now that we know why we feel this need to do well, where does the pressure come into the equation?
A situation where you want to perform your best and are worried about your ability to do so can create performance pressure. And nearly any pressure situation can trigger stress and performance anxiety. So, like I mentioned earlier, from competing in a sporting event to performing in front of a crowd, sometimes even parallel parking while your friends are watching can be very stressful. So, building on this concept, I would define performance pressure as a set of three interrelated factors that increase the importance of delivering a superior outcome. And I call these the pressure O's. O being outcome accountability, which is I am the person responsible for the task. H, high scrutiny and evaluation of my work. So, this would be all eyes are on me. My capability will be evaluated based on my performance. What will people think of me? S being significant consequences associated with performance. So, what will happen now? Will I get more opportunities? Will I be able to get ahead? So, this is how I'd like to sum why pressure is created.
I can definitely relate to the second point that you mentioned about fear of evaluation because I often felt like my board exam results were a topic of great interest for people who I didn't even know, which only added to my anxiety levels around the exam. And thank God I was able to do well. On another note, sometimes I end up feeling nervous even in a low stakes situation. Say, if my teacher asks me to answer a question in class and I know the answer, I still end up feeling stressed. And then not only do I feel stressed by this, but I also feel worried about why I felt worried about such a small thing. And this cycle just goes on and on.
So in any pressure situation, we have two things to consider: inputs and outputs. So inputs include you and your available resources, which can be time, financial resources, people you can count on, plus additionally our own skill set, knowledge, personality, sometimes communication skills. Outputs are rewards and expectations. So when outputs such as these rewards and expectations are minor, we are not under a lot of pressure. Other times, even if these expectations and rewards are big, we know that our inputs will be enough to meet or exceed expectations. In the situation you mentioned, to suddenly be made to stand in front of your whole class to give a response, despite having adequate resources, like you said, you knew the answer, can still create stress because you possibly perceived that situation as threatening. Hence, despite having these inputs, you experience stress. And so it is our appraisal of the situation due to which we can experience stress in both low and high pressure situations.
So I noticed that in your answer, you use stress and pressure as separate terms. And many of us, including me, use these terms very interchangeably when we speak. So are stress and pressure the same thing or are they distinctive?
So, as you can see on the structure slide on the screen, pressure can lead to stress, but they aren't the same thing. Pressure is typically applied externally, and these external parties can be your family member, your boss, your competitor, or even your teacher. All these people have very high expectations of you. And maybe the situation is high in risk, or it comes with an opportunity of a big reward, and you feel like you barely have enough resources. Whereas stress comes from the inside, and it is often related to negative feelings we may have associated with the task, personal fears, doubts. It can be related to lack of security or uncertainty. The good news is that being able to cope with pressure can help reduce our stress, hence, allowing us to perform better in pressure situations.
So you mentioned that pressure is external, and here are a few memes that show, obviously in a very exaggerated way, the kind of expectations that a parent might have of their child who's a student. It could even be anybody whose opinion really matters to us, like a coach or a teacher. And it's only natural for us to want to fulfill these expectations. And often this can really weigh heavily on us and cause a lot of stress. So, how can we cope with this?
The concept of the locus of control will be helpful to understand this. Locus of control is of two types: internal and external. So, internal locus of control is where we believe that our efforts determine our successes and failures. External locus of control is where we believe that our successes and failures are a result of outside forces or the actions of other people. While most of us lie somewhere on the continuum between these two extremes, some of us exercise either a higher internal locus of control or a higher external locus of control. So, for example, your parent asks you to secure a 90 plus in your final exams, or a coach tells you to beat an opponent in straight games. An individual with a higher external locus of control will say, they are putting so much pressure on me. Why do they have to do that? Couldn't they have said something more supportive? They are burdening me, right? So these individuals then also have a higher tendency to blame others for their failures. For example, the teacher didn't teach the subject well, or my parents burdened me, that's why I couldn't perform, or I lost the match because the referee was unfair, right? Whereas an individual with a higher internal locus of control will say, I probably have the capability to meet this goal since my parents or coach think so. Let me work towards it and give it my best shot. I can probably do it, right? So this demonstrates that no matter how grave our circumstance or situation might be, The only means of control that is available to us is the way we choose to react to a situation, irrespective of the resources we may or may not have. So, Miraya, to answer your question, expectations weigh heavily on us only when we give control of the outcome, which is the success or failure, to external forces, right? So, while you can't change what happens around you, you can definitely not script what people will say to you. You can choose to react to a situation most constructively and take responsibility.
So, what you're saying is that our attitude towards situations is always in our hands, and it can be manipulated to use the pressure to our advantage as encouragement, even. So, now we move on to our next section, which is thriving under pressure. Here you can see on the slide that prolonged stress causes performance anxiety and sometimes even breakdowns. So in this section, we will address what you can do when you're panicking in the moment before you need to do a certain task, what to do when you're feeling a sense of anticipation a few days before an important task, and what you can do systematically in your daily life to cope with pressure. So, one thing that I've noticed is that when I'm feeling nervous or pressured about something, I start feeling sleepy and my teeth start hurting. It could range from singing at a karaoke party to going on the squash court to play an important match. I find this physiological response to a purely psychological threat really odd sometimes. And what exactly happens internally when we are stressed?
To crack any performance, there is greater physical and mental effort involved, alongside greater persistence in the face of difficulties. So, your response of feeling sleepy could actually be your body telling you that it needs a break. I want to highlight here that our perception of these situations are what make them so scary or threatening. And what I mean by this is, if you see this image of the cat and its shadow, which evidently is a lion, it is indicative of how a task or situation may seem scarier than it is. Hence, once we perceive such pressure situations as scary, anxiety increases, then signals our body that it's under attack, right? This prepares our body for the fight, flight, freeze response, and some physiological reactions that you would have noticed alongside, your teeth hurting could be an increase in the heart rate, breathing rate, blood pressure. Our palms become sweaty, our body starts trembling. And this happens because our sympathetic nervous system is activated, which in turn stimulates the adrenal glands that then release, the stress hormone called cortisol. And hence, due to this heightened arousal, we tend to either deal with the situation, we run away, or we freeze in the moment.
Something interesting to note here, since you mentioned cortisol, is that high levels of cortisol or the stress hormone actually inhibit the part of the brain responsible for encoding memory. And for students, especially who study and memorize information under high pressure levels where you may have higher levels of cortisol, this can be bad because nothing actually goes into our head when we're stressed, which makes it even more important to understand how to cope with stress and reduce our cortisol levels. I remember a skill called stop that we did in the first webinar to instantaneously handle stress. Some of you might remember. So I think it could prove useful in this context as well. Can you take us through it?
Yes, of course. So, stop is taking the time to pause, and it is a skill to help us check in with ourselves, be aware of our current state, and respond in stressful situation versus reacting to them. And yes, it definitely is useful in this context. So, breaking it down, S means stop, that is, it's time to pause. T is take 5 deep breaths. So, what breathing does is it allows for oxygen to enter our blood, which quietens parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which handles our anxiety response. And then this activates our parasympathetic nervous system that tells us everything is okay, you can relax now, you will definitely not be eaten by the predator. Thus, enabling us to think rationally. Coming to O, observe your thoughts and feelings. So name it to tame it. So in a pressure situation, your thought may be, I will forget my lines, people will laugh at me, I will fall on stage, I'm not good enough, everybody is looking at me. And the subsequent emotion may be of nervousness, fear, maybe even anger, right? So bringing awareness to your thoughts and feelings can help us do something about them. Finally, P, that is proceed when you're ready. I'd just like to add that stop is one skill that you can do in the moment, instantly, whether it is right before a meeting, getting on stage, or before an exam or a match, or simply in a situation where you are feeling that pressure to perform. So it'll definitely bring down your stress levels.
For what it's worth, I've practiced stop since I've learned about it from you, and I noticed that it really helps to take away that stomach achy feeling you get when you're really, really stressed out.
Yes.
So, on another note, often when we have an important task coming up in a few days, we have this feeling of nervousness and anticipation. And at this point, we tend to keep practicing and rehearsing it. It could be analyzing your opponent's videos till late at night if you're a sports person, or practicing the piano non stop for a recital that you may have. It could even be a budding lawyer presenting her first case in the courtroom. And to illustrate this, let's see a quick video. So here it is.
Come on up here, Miss Crozier. That's where you sit.
Slip in a motion for a bench trial before she knows what hit her.
Your Honor, just a quick request before we begin. We respect your judgment in this matter, and we would like to ask for this to be a bench trial.
Miss Crozier?
I'm sorry. What was the question, Your Honor?
They would like this to be a bench trial. They want not to have a jury. Do you have an argument?
I don't know.
Well, if you don't know, then I must decide against you.
Well, the one thing that I would say, Your Honor, is that I do think that it would be fairer to have a cross-section of people, not just one. Please don't take that the wrong way.
Your Honor, I think that it would be fairer if we decide this matter on the law, not on the passions of a jury.
Miss Crozier?
That might be true, but I'm not going to try and rile up those passions. I want them to hear the truth.
Well, you've won your first argument, Miss Crozier. We'll start choosing a jury tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
So here we saw that initially this lawyer makes many mistakes despite having practiced hard for the case. So despite a lot of practice, we do tend to mess up and can't perform our best sometimes. So does practice really make perfect in high pressure situations?
Usually, when you practice a lot for a performance, brain activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is situated here, and it's responsible for decision making and attention, is subdued. This allows the brain circuits responsible for a routine to carry out their tasks without interference. So yes, practicing is definitely important. However, when performance anxiety becomes overwhelming, which is when we perceive that situation as scary, right? Like we discussed, like in this case, the lawyer, given it was her first case, she probably found this situation daunting. Her prefrontal cortex kicked into high gear, which interferes with activity in these brain circuits, leading to a person to fumble or choke under pressure. So yes, practicing definitely is an important component for doing well, but the key is to know how to cope with the stress associated with the performance, alongside practicing with intent, appraising a situation as non-threatening, and cultivating a positive attitude towards it.
So is there a certain way in which we can practice that can help us to cope with stress on the final day and allow our practice to shine through rather than it being outshadowed by the stress that we feel?
So one of the very useful things to do is practice under realistic pressure-filled conditions. And the way to do this is through intentional practice, which entails considerable specific and sustained efforts. So if you know you will have an audience when you perform, practice in front of a few friends before the event. If you know you will be videotaped, practice in front of a video camera. Or if you're a sports person having to compete in different temperature conditions, for example, try creating those temperature conditions and practice then. And some professional musicians even practice in virtual performance halls. So they say practice puts brains in our muscles, which means that it helps you become familiar with the situation on the final day of the performance and the potential stressors accompanying it. And it helps you make better decisions on the day of the verdict.
So, since you mentioned practicing in real pressure situations makes us familiar with the task, it reminds me of the Yerkes-Dodson law, which you can see a graphical depiction of on the screen. The law states that there's an optimal level of pressure that exists for any task, which maximizes our performance level. So, for example, if it's something that you're comfortable with, like making a pitch to clients that you've made 20 times before, you perform best when you're under a higher level of pressure. On the other hand, with a task that's new or unfamiliar, a lower level of pressure will allow you to perform your best.
Yes, exactly. Pressure can work in our favor, and having an optimal level of it during a rehearsed performance is required to do well. And it is only when it keeps building can one feel that one feels out of control, especially when presented with that unfamiliar task, which we view as threatening. Let's now see a video of a boy expressing how he feels about applying for an important opportunity he's hoping to get, after which we'll then discuss dealing with pressure in the long term.
Stress unusual lately? Any reason in particular?
Yeah, there's this Franklin Gates summer semester thing that my dad, that I really want to get into. But the application is due in a week and I haven't even looked at it.
Why not?
Well, every time I think about it, my brain starts this cycling thing about not getting in.
What would happen if you didn't get in?
Then I wouldn't be able to put it on my college applications, which means I wouldn't get into a good college. Adam Smith could have foreseen the inequities of modern capitalism. If I didn't get into a good college, I wouldn't have a good job. Diffusing the situation in Iran through unilateral diplomacy is my top priority as commander-in-chief. Which means I wouldn't be able to afford a good lifestyle. Hey, MTV, it's your boy Craig Gilner. Welcome to my crib. So I wouldn't be able to find a girlfriend. Which means I'd probably get depressed. And I'd end up like Mutada in a place like this for the rest of my life. So, what would happen if I didn't get in? I don't know, it's hard to explain.
So in this video, we saw a really nervous boy worried about his summer school application who just kept thinking of worst case scenarios, making the worst assumptions at each stage until he finally reached the conclusion that if he didn't get into summer school, he would end up in a psychiatric facility depressed.
So this video aptly shows the tendency of our brain to either jump to conclusions, assume the worst, pay attention to the negative details, or confusing feelings with facts, especially when faced with this unfamiliar situation, right? He was applying for the summer school for the first time, say for example, right? These are called automatic negative thoughts, also known as ANTs. Our brains are wired to focus more on the negative, evolutionarily meant for protecting, safeguarding, and preparing us for danger situations. But this capability to imagine threats can also work against us by turning our mind into a random negative thoughts generator. Thoughts can have a real impact on how you feel and how you behave. And we tend to fall into these thought holes, which is worrying about worry, worry, and so on, which can have a significant impact on every cell of our body.
So, what you're saying is that even though our goal is to do well, we have a tendency to focus only on what would happen if we did badly. And if this is such a natural tendency, like you said, we can't really control what we think. Is there a way that we can overcome it and approach pressure in a more positive way? And what could the boy have done in this situation to avoid spiraling?
Yes, there always is a solution. Firstly, the skill of stop can help you be aware of these ants, the automatic negative thoughts. We can and retrain our brain to focus more on the positive than the negative by changing the dialogue of our thoughts. Hence, more than controlling our thoughts, it is about being aware of them and acknowledging them so that we then know what to do about them. Here is where I'd like to introduce this very interesting concept called positive empowering thoughts, also known as PETs. And the way is to convert ants to pets, which can help one have a healthy relationship with pressure. So, pet one, reframing your negative thoughts into something more uplifting. So, on your screen, you see a trigger, you see an automatic thought, which is an automatic negative thought in most cases, and you see a new thought. Drawing from this example of the boy, his trigger could be, I haven't started my application for summer school, which is due in just a week, and my father really wants me to get in. Trigger, his aunt, I won't get in. My father will kill me. I'll fail in life. I'll never get a good job. Right? His new thought could be, what if I do get in? It's never too late. Let me start filling out the application now. I'm going to do my best and work through this like I always do. Right? So this is pet one. Pet two is reframe the should and shouldn't statements. So the next time you catch yourself saying, I should or I shouldn't, swap that statement for a more positive phrase that focuses on the benefits or its alignment with your beliefs or values instead. So for example, saying, I should practice implies that either you don't practice or are expected to practice and don't really want to. Instead, tell yourself a pet like, I look forward to practicing, or it's important to me that I practice to do well, or even I love the way I feel after I practice. So the same applies for shouldn't statements, where a statement like I shouldn't be postponing my work can be converted to a pet saying I choose not to postpone work. So these positive thoughts may not ring true initially, but eventually they will feel true as practicing becomes a new habit. So let's now see a behind the scenes video of a sitcom where an actor, despite several retakes of her shot, takes the challenge head on and eventually managed to deliver her dialogue as per her expectations. Let's see it.
No, I don't want to switch. Come on. I can throw wet paper towels here.
Well, at Monica's, you can eat.
No, I'm sorry, but this is allowed to happen. No, but Phoebe, I don't want to switch. Come on, please. I can throw wet paper towels here.
Well, at Monica's.
Come on, yeah. It's not silly.
Here we go.
Okay.
No.
No,
Maybe I just better say the line. Phoebe, I can do with,
I can throw wet paper towels here.
But no.
Okay, it's all right. I can do it. Yes, you can. Ready?
Yeah.
Come on, I don't want to switch. Please, come on. I can throw wet paper towels here.
No, but at Monica's, you can eat cookies over the sink.
So while it seems otherwise, this could easily be considered a pressure situation where all eyes were on her to execute her lines. Her co-actors were waiting, plus a few retakes had already happened. So here, despite doing these several retakes, we saw that the actor exercised an internal locus of control. So there was no blame on the co-actors or an excuse that the line was too funny to execute, etc. She used PET 1, which encourages use of uplifting statements, and not once did she say shoulds and should nots. So from saying, what's going to happen? How's it ever going to get said? Which are indicators of pressure? She went on to saying, maybe I just better say the line. It's all right, I can do it. So overall, she kept a great attitude about it and eventually managed to execute her dialogue without feeling excessive amounts of pressure because the situation didn't seem as threatening to her as it would perhaps to another person, right? So, hence, belief in a successful outcome can prevent you from this worry and help you act more with confidence.
So it's great to know that there are so many techniques that we can use for every stage of pressure that we feel. And now, what are some things that we can incorporate in our daily life to supplement the skills that we've already gone through?
I'd like to suggest three strategies. The first one, it's called what if scenario. So this lets you play out the worst case outcomes and you're able to brace yourself for them. So for example, if I were to tell you all about how Miraya and I prepared for this webinar, our worst case scenarios were, what if while we are giving this presentation, we lose all our slides? What if during the middle of the webinar, we lose internet connection and it gets dissolved? What if 3 minutes before we are supposed to begin, we spilled coffee all over our shirt? So rest assured, we are already prepared for these situations. So the key here is that you are anticipating the unexpected. And what this does is it can protect you from a pressure surge by allowing you to prepare for and thus be less startled by the unexpected. So instead of panicking, you will be better able to maintain composure and continue your task to the best of your ability. The second strategy is visualization or visual imagery, which I'm sure most of you are aware of and perhaps are already doing. So for this, find a comfortable spot and close your eyes. Imagine being at your very best. Mentally rehearse a routine before an important event or competition. Using imagery to review resources you can use in unexpected situations can also be helpful. Imagine feeling confident during your visualization and practice deep breathing using these mental pressure scenarios. So that's strategy 2. Coming to strategy 3, which is create a pre-performance routine. So the idea here is to create a short routine that you go through minutes before you present or perform. A pre-routine helps you from becoming distracted. It keeps you focused and puts you in the zone by signaling to your body that it's time to perform. So to give you some tips for creating your pre-performance routine, add a mental component where you may review points or anticipate the types of problems you're about to face, like the what if scenarios. Then include a physical component, which could be breathing, it could be power posing. Then include a visualization of yourself succeeding. So we just spoke of visualization. Finally, finish with an anchor word or phrase that signals you're ready for showtime.
So you mentioned power posing, which is something that really helps me, and it is essentially the power of positive body language. So here on the slide, you can see some famous people in power poses. While power posing is a hotly debated topic in psychology, some people agree with it while some people don't. Research has shown that standing or sitting in a power pose can reduce your cortisol levels by up to 25%, which is very significant in reducing the kind of stress and pressure you feel before an important event. One concern that I had when I was power posing was I'll just stand in these weird poses and people will be looking at me. What will they think of me? and that would actually cause more anxiety. But in my experience, I've found that it's not as noticeable as you might think, and it's actually really helpful.
Exactly. So, as they say, not one size fits all. So, you may pick any strategy that will work for you as long as it helps you cope with the pressure. So, finally, to summarize this webinar, here is how you can cope with the pressure to do well. So, we have a situation or event where we want to perform and do well. Then this induces pressure. Now, what can we do? We review our input and output. So, if you remember, inputs are our resources, time, financial resources, personal skills, etc. And outputs are our expectations and rewards. Okay, next. Exercise an internal locus of control. That now that I have reviewed my resources, I know that I can do it, or what is it that I need to do. What is it that I need to do the performance. So I am responsible. That is my internal locus. Okay. Then use stop. So stop will help you identify your thoughts and feelings around the event, right? Next, convert ants to pets. So after using stop, you will have recognized ants, and now you can convert these ants to positive empowering thoughts, which are your pets. Okay, then smooth performance. So you can incorporate any of the strategies that we spoke about in the end to include in your performance routine to carry out a smooth performance. And please don't worry about remembering all this information. We will give you a handout where you will have all that you need to know.
So thank you for that very informative summary where we kind of look at everything that we've covered, and using all these things, eventually it will culminate into a smooth and stress-free performance. And now we have our Q&A section. So any questions that you have put into the Q&A box, we will answer now. So I've picked a couple of interesting ones to ask the speaker. So our first one is asked by Ishika. She said that you mentioned that pressure is external, but the pressure that we put on ourselves, is that internal or is it external?
Ishika, thank you for your question. So pressure is external, including the ones that we put on ourselves. So for example, you say you're a person who usually struggles to clock 5,000 steps in a day. And one morning you tell yourself, today I'll clock, say, 15,000 steps, right? And if meeting this particular challenge really matters to you, then it is, of course, a pressure situation. You will experience stress depending on your interpretation of this pressure situation. So if you think, I'm not capable of completing this challenge, why did I commit to doing 15,000 steps? It's so difficult. Or I have to stick to my commitment, or I'll just fall in my eyes. If these are your thoughts, then you will definitely experience stress. So pressure situations are externally driven, and they can cause stress, which is internally driven. So I hope, Ishika, I was able to answer your question and give you clarity. If not, please email us.
Our second question is from Rajiv, and he asked, is having an external locus of control bad?
Okay. Rajiv, thank you for your question. So having an external locus of control does not always equal bad. In some situations, it can actually be a good thing, especially when a particular area is not your forte, like, a fish wanting to climb a tree. So, for example, a person who is not, say, great at sports might feel anxious about their performance if they have a very strong internal locus of control. And thus, thinking about how, say, poor he or she is at sports might make them feel stressed thinking about having to participate in, say, athletics during a physical education class. However, if this person takes an external focus during such activities, so this focus being the game is too hard, they will probably feel more relaxed and less stressed. So, yes, in such situations, having an external locus of control is definitely not bad. Now, having said this, uh, a lot of research has shown that those with a strong internal locus of control, and people who choose and take responsibility for the way they react to stresses and circumstances are more likely to achieve better health and happiness than those with an external locus. So it's up to us in what situations what we decide to exercise. I hope this gives you clarity, Rajiv.
Our next question is from Preeti, and she asked if negative thoughts existed to keep us safe. I think we mentioned this earlier, the evolutionary aspect of negative thoughts. Then why are they considered bad?
Preeti, Mirai, you said?
Yeah.
Preeti, thank you for your question. So earlier in human history, paying attention to dangerous and negative threats was literally a matter of life and death, right? Which we discussed. So those who were more attuned to danger and who paid more attention to these threats were more likely to survive. That's how they came about. Now, in today's day and age, we no longer need to be on constant high alert as our early ancestors needed to be in order to survive. And so our brain's tendency to still focus on the negative can cause us to, dwell on dark thoughts. It may affect our performance. It may hurt our relationship with our loved ones. And sometimes it even makes it difficult to have an optimistic outlook on life. Hence, they are considered unhealthy.
Okay, so Preeti, I hope that you found that answered your question. Our next question is from Nidhi, and she asked, "What is wrong with using words like should, shouldn't, and must?"
Nidhi, thank you for your question. And I was hoping to address this during the webinar, and I'm glad that you have asked this. So, when we believe that we must or we should do something, the demands they imply set expectations. And as a result, we might end up setting standards that are unrealistic. So, when these expectations are not met, we can experience frustration, anger, disappointment, and then these get into the way of solving problems. So, instead, it is better to use words that align with our values and beliefs, which we spoke about. So, for example, say you are a business owner. So, using a should, you will say, I should ensure my business does well. So, this implies expectations. Or you can choose to say, it is important to me that my business does well. This implies self belief or values. So I hope you now understand why we should avoid the shoulds and shouldn'ts and musts.
Okay, so Nidhi, I hope that answered your question. And we have another one from Karan. He asked, "What can we do to rewire the brain to focus on positives?" I think maybe he meant, how do we convert ants to pets? And
Okay. So there are some things we can do to rewire the brain. Of course, alongside converting the negative thoughts, the ants to pets, I'd like to suggest two additional practices, which help and can be done every day. One can be practice gratitude every day. So practicing gratitude is asking yourself, what am I thankful for? It could be, I'm thankful for a stocked fridge. I'm thankful to be with my family in these trying times. Or I'm thankful for the coffee I had this afternoon, right? So try being as specific as possible when you practice gratitude. It's hard to really feel overwhelmed by bad thoughts while feeling grateful. So being grateful reduces negativity by creating a boost of feel good chemicals like the serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin that we speak about, and I'd definitely recommend it. The second thing is scan for the 3 daily positives. That at the end of each day, make a list of 3 specific good things that happened that day and reflect on what caused them to happen. So the good things could be anything, like an unexpected call from an old friend, a positive remark someone made at home or at work, or even a pretty sunset, right? So every time you have a positive or happy thought, uh, same chemicals are released. Your brain releases these happy chemicals that make you feel good. While so when most of us feel happy, our muscles relax, our heartbeat slows, our hands become dry. So it's complete opposite of the stress reaction. And we breathe slower. And your mind and body both react to good thoughts like they do with negative thoughts. So hope these practices help you as much as they help me. And they will definitely help you identify the good that is happening in your life versus only the negative.
We have a final question from Avinash Bhavnani. So he says that he's a squash coach and has a few students attending from the age of 10 to 18, and asks if you can explain the concept of locus of control in layman's terms.
Okay. Okay. So locus of control would be how we choose to look at situations, right? That is our perception of the event and whether we decide to take responsibility for it. So say uh, Avinash, he said he's a squash coach. Okay. So say you're preparing, like for example, we spoke about, how after you play a match, right? After players play a match, sometimes when it doesn't go in your favor, you can either choose to say that, next time I'll put in more hard work. Probably these are the few things I could have done better in order to perform better at the game, versus saying that, oh, the referee made an unfair call, that's why I lost. Oh, the opponent was distracting me, so I couldn't hit my drop shot, or they were using delay tactics, how you use in squash, you're tying your laces or you're going and stretching on one corner of the court. So internal locus of control will be taking responsibility in that situation, that I am responsible for my game, and it is in my power to decide what is it that I can do differently next time. So this would help. I hope that helps you understand uh, locus of control.
Thank you so much for that answer. And with that, we've come to the end of the questions. So thank you to everybody for joining us today on this Sunday morning. To learn more about All Heart India, visit allheartindia.com, All Heart India on Instagram. You can see the details on the slide. To book therapy sessions, please DM on Instagram or email the ID you see here. To watch our previous webinars on effective family communication and procrastination, check out our YouTube channel, Miraya Gupta X All Heart India. Some of you may even be watching us from there right now. And once you leave the webinar, you will be automatically redirected to a feedback form, which is anonymous. So please give us your honest opinion. And a summary, as mentioned before, a summary of everything we discussed, along with some templates to carry out the exercises, will be sent to you. And with that, we close. And a big thank you to our speaker for the.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Miraya.